The old farmhouse was silent. Emily sat alone, listening to the wind howl outside. In the hallway stood the grandfather clock, its face dark, its hands frozen. It had been her great-grandmother's. Emily never liked looking at it. The clock was too tall, too imposing. It felt like it was watching. She had inherited the house and all its contents a year ago. The clock was a mystery. Her great-grandmother had refused to sell it, refused to let anyone touch it. Emily's mother told stories about the clock, about her grandmother, about whispers and shadows. Emily shook her head. She didn't believe in ghosts. She told herself it was just an old, broken clock. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. It was as if the clock held a secret it was just waiting to tell. Emily's great-grandmother, Margaret, had lived a solitary life. She rarely left the farmhouse. People in town whispered about a tragedy, a lost love. They said Margaret had shut herself away, her heart broken. The only constant in her life was the clock. Margaret claimed the clock spoke to her, not in words but in time. She would stare at its face for hours, her eyes following the slow, steady movement of the hands. Emily never understood her great-grandmother's obsession. Now, alone in the house, she was starting to. The clock was more than just a timepiece. It was a link to the past, a symbol of her family's history, and as Emily sat in the silence, she felt a growing need to understand its secrets. She needed to know the truth about Margaret and the clock. The storm raged outside, the wind howling like a banshee. Emily lay in bed, unable to sleep, and then she heard it, a faint ticking coming from the hallway. It was the grandfather clock, but it was broken. It hadn't ticked in years. She got out of bed, her heart pounding. As she crept closer to the hallway, the ticking grew louder. It was no longer a faint sound, but a steady, insistent beat, like a heart beating in the silence. Emily peered into the hallway. The clock face was illuminated by an eerie glow, and the hands were moving. They weren't moving at their normal pace. They were spinning wildly, faster and faster. The ticking became a frantic drumming. Fear coiled in Emily's stomach. This was wrong, terribly wrong. The clock was not supposed to be working, and yet here it was, ticking away as if possessed. Emily couldn't take her eyes off the clock. The hands were now a blur, the ticking deafening, and then she saw it, a face in the clock face. It wasn't the carved face of the clock. This face was different, pale, gaunt, with eyes filled with a terrible sadness. The face was Margaret's, but it was Margaret as Emily had never known her. This Margaret was filled with pain, with regret. Her mouth moved, forming words Emily couldn't hear, but she could feel their weight. A warning? A plea? Emily didn't know. The ticking reached a fever pitch. The face in the clock grew more intense, the sadness in its eyes unbearable. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The hands froze. The ticking ceased. The face vanished. Emily was left standing in the silent hallway, the only sound the beating of her own heart. The clock stood still, its face dark once more. But Emily knew the truth. It was more than just a clock, it was a vessel, a conduit to the other side, and it had shown her a glimpse of the darkness that lay beyond.